You kept trying to explain yourself until one day you realized something painful. No matter how carefully you chose your words, no matter how patiently you described what was happening inside you, some people had already decided who you were before you ever spoke. You replayed conversations in your mind while lying awake at night, wondering if you should have said something differently, if another explanation would finally make them understand. You carried the weight of being misunderstood like a burden that never left your shoulders. It was exhausting, because you were not trying to prove that you were better than anyone else. You simply wanted someone to truly see you. Maybe you have watched people misunderstand your silence as arrogance. Maybe they interpreted your kindness as weakness, or your boundaries as rejection. Maybe your deepest convictions made you appear strange to those who only understood what they could immediately see. The hardest part was not that people disagreed with you. It was feeling that they never even tried to understand your heart. Somewhere along the way you started asking God questions you never wanted to admit out loud. Why does it seem so difficult to be understood? Why does every sincere attempt to explain myself leave me feeling even more alone? Why do the people closest to me seem unable to recognize what I carry inside? Those questions can quietly grow into discouragement because every human heart longs to be known. We all desire the comfort of being understood by the people we love, yet there are seasons when that comfort seems completely absent. Instead of understanding, you encounter assumptions. Instead of compassion, you meet judgment. Instead of encouragement, you receive silence. If this season feels familiar, know that you are not alone. Many faithful people have walked through moments where they felt invisible even while surrounded by others. If this message reflects what you have been living, share your experience in the comments. Sometimes simply saying "I understand" reminds someone else that they are not walking through this alone. There is something difficult to accept about these seasons. We often believe that if we could simply find the right words, everything would finally make sense to everyone around us. We imagine one perfect conversation that would remove every misunderstanding and heal every broken relationship. But life rarely unfolds that way. Some misunderstandings remain, not because your explanation was incomplete, but because another person's ability to understand has limits that you cannot control. That realization can feel deeply painful because it confronts one of our strongest desires, the desire to be fully known by other people. Yet perhaps this season is inviting you to discover something even deeper. Perhaps your identity cannot rest on whether every person understands your heart. Throughout Scripture, we repeatedly encounter men and women who walked faithfully while being misunderstood. Their stories remind us that misunderstanding is not always evidence that something is wrong. Sometimes it simply reflects the reality that God is doing a quiet work which cannot yet be recognized by everyone around them. That does not make the loneliness disappear overnight. It does not erase the disappointment of strained relationships or unanswered questions. But it gently shifts the focus away from earning universal approval and toward trusting the one who already knows every hidden thought, every silent prayer and every tear that no one else ever noticed. There is remarkable comfort in remembering that before anyone else formed an opinion about you, God already knew you completely. He knew your fears before you spoke them. He knew your weaknesses without turning away from you. He knew every failure and every hope, yet his invitation remained one of grace, patience, and faithful presence. Human understanding will always be incomplete. Even those who love us most cannot fully enter the hidden places of our hearts. But God is never surprised by those hidden places. He does not misunderstand your motives because he sees beyond appearances. He understands the prayers you struggle to put into words. He knows the battles you fight in silence. He sees the tears that never reach anyone else's eyes. That truth becomes especially precious when life leaves you feeling isolated. It reminds you that being misunderstood by people does not mean you have been abandoned by God. In fact, some of the deepest seasons of spiritual growth happen when external validation becomes scarce, and your confidence slowly learns to rest in God's presence instead of human approval. This journey is rarely comfortable. There will still be conversations that end with disappointment. There will still be relationships where your heart remains unseen, yet those moments do not have the final word over your identity. Little by little, God teaches his children that peace does not always come from finally convincing everyone else. Sometimes peace grows quietly, as we surrender the impossible task of controlling how every person perceives us. We continue to love. We continue to forgive. We continue to speak truth with humility. Then we entrust the results to God, recognizing that only He can transform hearts. That surrender is not weakness. It is a profound act of faith. It acknowledges that our responsibility is faithfulness, not perfect outcomes, and perhaps that is where hope begins to return. Instead of measuring your worth by how many people finally understand you, you begin discovering the freedom of knowing that you are already fully known by the one whose opinion matters most. The journey is not finished, and there is still a deeper lesson waiting to unfold, but even now you can begin to see that your current season may be shaping a quieter strength than you ever expected. It may be teaching you that while you cannot force people to understand you, you can continue walking faithfully, trusting that God is present in every misunderstood step. As that quiet strength begins to grow, you may notice something unexpected. The need to convince everyone slowly loses its grip on your heart. Not because the pain disappears, but because you begin to understand that there are burdens God never intended you to carry. One of those burdens is trying to manage how every person interprets your life. There is a subtle difference between living honestly and living to be understood. For a long time, you may have confused the two. You believed that if people misunderstood your intentions, you had somehow failed, so you kept explaining. You replayed conversations in your mind. You searched for better words, clearer examples, more convincing reasons. You hoped that if they could only see what God was doing inside you, they would finally stop questioning your decisions. Yet every explanation seemed to create another misunderstanding. Every attempt to defend yourself left you more exhausted than before. Eventually, you reached a place where even speaking felt heavy. You became quieter, not because you no longer cared, but because you realized that some hearts are not changed by better explanations. They are changed only when they are ready to listen. That realization can feel heartbreaking at first because it forces you to release something you desperately wanted to control. It is difficult to accept that love does not guarantee understanding. Faithfulness does not guarantee approval. Integrity does not guarantee that others will interpret your actions fairly. Yet this truth is not meant to make you cynical. It is meant to make you free. Throughout life, God often teaches His children through experiences they would never choose for themselves. Waiting teaches patience. Loss teaches dependence. Silence teaches attentiveness. And being misunderstood teaches you where your identity truly rests. Imagine carrying a fragile jar filled with water while trying to satisfy every opinion around you. Every criticism causes you to stumble. Every misunderstanding makes you grip the jar more tightly. Before long, you are so focused on protecting your reputation that you barely notice the road God is inviting you to walk. Then, little by little, He begins loosening your hands. Not to make you careless, but to remind you that He is able to carry what you never could. There are moments when you may look back over your life and realize that some of the greatest changes happened during seasons when almost nobody understood you. Perhaps friends questioned why you stepped away from certain habits. Perhaps family members could not understand why your priorities changed. Perhaps people assumed your quietness meant distance when, in reality, God was teaching you to listen more carefully to His voice than to the noise surrounding you. Those moments often feel lonely while you are living through them. But later, you begin to recognize that they were shaping something precious inside you. Character rarely grows where applause is constant. Trust is often strengthened where certainty is absent. Faith deepens when you continue walking, even without the comfort of being fully understood. This does not mean you stop loving people. It does not mean you isolate yourself or believe that every disagreement is proof you are on the right path. Wisdom still listens. Humility still receives correction. Love still seeks peace whenever possible. Yet there is a difference between remaining teachable and becoming imprisoned by the opinions of others. God invites His children into freedom, not into endless anxiety over every misunderstanding. Consider how often your prayers have sounded like this. Lord, please make them understand me. There is nothing wrong with bringing that desire before Him. He welcomes every honest prayer, but sometimes His answer begins by gently changing a different question. Instead of making everyone understand you, He begins helping you understand Him more deeply. Instead of building your confidence upon human agreement, He anchors it in His steady presence. That transformation is quiet. It happens through ordinary days, unseen acts of obedience, whispered prayers before sunrise, and moments when you choose forgiveness instead of resentment. Slowly you discover that peace does not always arrive through changed circumstances. Sometimes it arrives because your heart has learned to trust God's faithfulness, even when circumstances remain unchanged. If these words are meeting you in a season where you feel unseen, share your story in the comments. Your experience may become a source of encouragement for someone else who has been silently asking the same questions. Often the testimonies we hesitate to tell become reminders that none of us walks this road alone. Perhaps one day you will meet someone who understands your journey in ways you never expected. Perhaps God will bring relationships marked by greater compassion and deeper trust. But even if those blessings take time, your present season is not empty. It is filled with opportunities to discover that God's knowledge of you is complete. He is not confused by your tears. He is not discouraged by your weakness. He is not surprised by your questions. He remains faithful, even when your emotions rise and fall from one day to the next. That does not remove every ache from your heart, but it gives that ache a place to rest. You no longer have to carry it alone. The road ahead may still include misunderstandings, but it also includes the quiet assurance that your life is held by a God who sees beyond appearances and whose love does not depend on public approval. As that assurance grows stronger, you begin to realize that your calling is not to force every person to understand you. Your calling is to keep walking faithfully, loving sincerely, and trusting that the one who knows you completely will continue shaping you through every season, including the ones that make the least sense today. There is another quiet lesson hidden inside this journey that many people do not recognize until years later. Some of the relationships that caused you the deepest pain were never meant to become the foundation of your identity. That realization is not an invitation to become distant or guarded. It is an invitation to place every relationship in its proper place. Human beings are a gift from God, but they were never meant to replace Him as the source of your security. When that truth begins to settle into your heart, something remarkable happens. The fear of being misunderstood slowly gives way to the freedom of simply being faithful. You stop measuring every conversation by whether people agreed with you. Instead, you begin asking yourself a different question. Was I honest? Was I loving? Did I respond with humility? Did I honor God in the way I treated this person? Those questions bring a different kind of peace because they focus on what you can actually control. You cannot control another person's assumptions. You cannot force someone to interpret your motives correctly. You cannot make another heart ready to receive what you are trying to communicate, but you can choose patience instead of bitterness. You can choose kindness instead of defensiveness. You can choose integrity even when no one notices. Those choices may seem small, but they quietly shape the person you are becoming. Think about how often growth happens beneath the surface. A seed buried in the ground appears inactive to everyone looking from above. Nothing about the soil suggests that life is unfolding beneath it, yet every day unseen roots stretch deeper before the first green leaf ever breaks through the earth. If someone judged that seed too early, they might conclude that nothing was happening at all. Your spiritual life often unfolds in much the same way. There are seasons when God's work inside you is almost invisible, even to those who know you well. Others may misunderstand your silence because they cannot see the roots He is growing beneath the surface. They may mistake your slower pace for fear when God is actually teaching discernment. They may assume your restraint is weakness when He is producing gentleness that will sustain you far longer than anger ever could. Because they cannot see the hidden work, they interpret only what is visible. That does not make them evil. It simply reminds us that human vision is limited. We all see only part of the story. Recognizing this can soften your heart toward those who have misunderstood you. Instead of assuming they intended to wound you, you may begin to realize that they too are limited by their own experiences, fears, expectations, and blind spots. Compassion does not erase accountability, and forgiveness does not always restore every relationship, but it does protect your own heart from becoming hardened by disappointment. Carrying resentment into every new season only extends the influence of old wounds. God desires something better for you. He desires a heart that remains tender without becoming fragile, courageous without becoming proud, and humble without losing confidence in the identity he has given you. There will still be days when loneliness returns unexpectedly. You may hear a careless comment that brings back old memories. You may watch others being celebrated while your own efforts seem unnoticed. You may wonder why your faithfulness often unfolds in quiet places, while others appear to receive recognition with ease. In those moments, remember that heaven measures success differently than the world often does. The world frequently celebrates visibility. God consistently values faithfulness. The world rewards immediate results. God patiently forms enduring character. The world encourages constant self-promotion. God often accomplishes his deepest work through quiet obedience that no audience ever applauds. None of this means your desires are wrong. It is natural to long for understanding, meaningful relationships, and people who truly know your heart. Those are beautiful gifts. But when those gifts become delayed, they need not become the measure of God's love for you. His love was never proven by how many people understood you. It was revealed through his constant faithfulness, his mercy that meets you every morning, his presence in the darkest valleys, and his promise that he will never leave nor forsake those who trust in him. As you continue forward, you may discover that one of the greatest miracles is not that everyone finally understands your story. The greater miracle is that your heart becomes increasingly secure even when they do not. You become less driven by the need for approval and more anchored in the quiet confidence that comes from walking with God. That confidence is not loud. It does not demand attention. It does not seek to win every argument or answer every accusation. It simply continues moving forward with steady hope because it knows that truth does not lose its value simply because it is misunderstood. If this message has reminded you that your present season is not without purpose, let your testimony encourage someone else. Share how God has remained faithful even through seasons when you felt unseen or misunderstood. Your story may become the reminder another weary heart has been praying for. Sometimes the encouragement we are searching for arrives through the honest words of someone who has walked a similar road and discovered that God's presence was there all along. Perhaps that is part of your journey as well. Not to convince every person that your path makes sense, but to become living evidence that God can sustain a person through seasons of misunderstanding without allowing those seasons to define them. One day you may look back and realize that what once felt like rejection became the place where your faith grew roots that could not be shaken. You may recognize that the silence you feared became the place where you learned to hear God's voice more clearly. You may discover that the loneliness you resisted became the place where his companionship became more precious than ever before. Even if you cannot yet see the full picture, you can continue taking the next faithful step. The God who knows you completely is still walking beside you, still shaping your character, still strengthening your hope, and still working in ways that extend far beyond what you can presently understand.